This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. Wild swings on Wall Street today in the wake of last week's Friday the 13th horror show. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 72 points in a morning that saw a record number of shares change hands. But bargain hunting by institutions spurred a rally in which the Dow climbed 88 points. That's where it finished, 88 points up for the day, to close the Dow at 2,657. 2,657. In the wake of all this, analysts wondered if Friday's plunge was past or prologue. CBS News business correspondent Ray Brady tracked this surprising day's ups and downs.
Call it the bomb that never went off. Wall Street came to work worried amid scare headlines and predictions of worse to come.
Well, it's down into an abyss with no stop.
The international press stood ready to blare the market's troubles to the world. So this bomb that fizzled left Wall Streeters feeling great.
We've got the volume back. We've got confidence back in ourselves.
The mood was very exuberant after the close today because we were up 88 points.
They were shell-shocked in London, though, where stock prices did go down more than 3%.
I don't remember a day quite as crazy as this in London.
But why didn't that happen here? A repeat of Friday and Black Monday 1987. That 1-2 punch that sent prices into their biggest drop in history. The changes that brought to Wall Street helped today. Equally important, the Federal Reserve over the weekend let it be known that it would lend money to Wall Street firms to keep an orderly stock market.
The Fed flooded the banks with money and gave every assurance of trying to cooperate with the marketplace. I think that did a lot to buoy up investor confidence. We didn't see that action on the part of the Fed until midday on that Black Monday of October 1987.
Even so, some big Wall Street players lost big money. The stock some think set off Friday's drop, United Airlines, plummeted by nearly 57 points. This man, Michael Steinhardt, lost nearly $13 million in just one stock, U.S. Air, on Friday. American Airlines crashed by nearly 22 points today, a big loss for wheeler-dealer Donald Trump, who withdrew his bid to buy the airline. Some Wall Streeters say all this is a signal that the era of multi-billion-dollar takeovers and leveraged buyouts is over.
There is less borrowed money available. There is less dumb money available to finance dumb deals, of which we had many.
Some of today's price rise came from program trading, computers bidding up prices. But analysts note the outlook for the market and the economy is brighter than it was in 1987. Another reason today did not turn into Black Monday 1989. Dan?
Thanks, Ray. President Bush today said he was not worried about the stock market's behavior. He said federal agencies are, and I quote, monitoring the situation, and that's where it stands. Bob Fall checked around to see if the small investors shared that confidence in Wall Street.
Like thousands of small investors, New York City fireman Joe O'Brien got clobbered in Friday's market. Today, he came back to buy more.
I think that in the foreseeable future that there's some money to be made in the stock market.
Businesswoman Cher Detweiler was not panicking either.
Things are much more stable than they were 2 years ago.
You're not
much
frightened?
More stable, not at all. Not at all. I'm cautious, but I'm not frightened.
That feeling was not limited just to young investors.
Things will be all right. We don't sell America short.
Today, from Florida retirement communities to America's heartland, many small investors were looking to buy.
I'm a long-term investor, and that's why I really don't worry about it that much, because I know the market is always going to come back.
If the little investor does have money, now is a wonderful time to buy stock. I mean, when do you want to get on the ship? When it's in the harbor, or do you want to wait till it goes out of the harbor and then swim after it?
People can't always invest between 9 and 5. That's why we're here, 24 hours a day. So call us anytime.
Industry commercials like this have apparently worked. Small investors have been trickling back. Black Monday 2 years ago drove many small investors out of the market. Many who stayed in have been tested by fire and are not likely to panic. In a poll taken Friday and Saturday of customers of one mutual fund, 3 of 4 said they're in the market for the long haul. 2/3 of those polled said they feel that now is the time to buy, not sell. The overwhelming majority also said they expect the market to go up. Encouraged by some reforms enacted to prevent another 1987 crash, small investors still have some gripes.
I think the small investor could complain about the program trading that's been going on because the volatility is unwarranted.
All this suggests that while a lot of the smart money worried that the sky might fall, a lot of the so-called little guys did keep their feet on the ground.
Now I'm going to tell you, the market is very unpredictable. It's sort of like marriage. So when my marriage is going well, I buy stock. And when it's going poorly, I sell stock. And over 30 years and 6 marriages, I have been very successful in the market.
Not everyone needs fancy computers. Bob Paul, CBS News, New York.
In Europe, stock prices opened sharply lower but rebounded somewhat after the New York Exchange turned around. London stocks closed down about 3%. The Japanese market was steadier, dropping less than 2%. It is already Tuesday in Japan, and trading will begin again soon. Our Tokyo correspondent Bill Whitaker is standing by there. Bill?
Hello, Dan. The Tokyo stock market opens in about an hour and a half. Investors here are congratulating themselves for containing the market slide Monday, and they're planning and hoping for a repeat performance today.
We are taking it rather moderately this time.
Most of the credit for the markets holding the line goes to Japan's Ministry of Finance for urging major brokerage houses and investors to stick together and not panic. The stakes were enormous because Tokyo was the first major market to open Monday, setting the pace for the financial world.
We know that our behavior will be watched by very many spectators.
Since the crash of '87, Japanese investors have become indispensable players in the U.S. market, and the Tokyo stock market has become the richest in the world, using its wealth as a buffer against market fluctuations.
The Japanese are major players in all types of corporate financing arrangements, government financing in the stock market as well, and they can't be underestimated.
Friday's slump was triggered in part by Japanese banks refusing to finance the pilot management group wanting to buy United Airlines. Today, that group is going back to the Japanese banks, hoping to get the deal off the ground. Dan?
Bill Whitaker in Tokyo. Now about the money mess in Washington. $16 billion in automatic across-the-board federal spending cuts are to take effect tonight under the Graham-Rudman-Hollings budget deficit law. The cuts are being triggered because of the failure of the President and the Congress to meet the deadline and the money target for reducing the federal budget deficit that has grown so overwhelming during the 1980s. Our chief Washington correspondent, Bob Schieffer, has the latest from Capitol Hill on the budget mumbo-jumbo. Bob?
Dan, the Democrats argue that the whole budget-cutting process just broke down because the White House insisted for weeks on attaching the president's proposed cut in the capital gains tax rate onto the congressional bill to cut the deficit.
Had it not been for this obsession of the administration with this capital gains tax cut, we would have had this budget out of here weeks ago.
But the Republican line is that Congress is just as guilty as the White House.
Instead of making tough choices, we've been playing dodgeball.
Whatever the case, the Graham-Rudman law orders an automatic cut in federal spending of $16 billion starting at midnight. Except for Social Security and several other programs that Congress exempted, the cuts are across the board. $8 billion from defense, $8 billion from domestic programs. Reductions in such things as Medicare benefits, help for veterans on the GI Bill, dairy price supports, and drought relief. For the most part, however, the immediate impact is minimal. Why? Because spending cutbacks can be spread over the next 12 months. That means federal department heads can avoid immediate widespread layoffs by simply juggling existing funds.
We shouldn't get the sense of panic that something has to be done by midnight or there's some irreversible damage done.
But today, the White House took a new tack, suggesting an across-the-board cut may not be all bad.
On the other hand, it's an element of discipline, and the system needs to be reassured that there is some trace of discipline left in our fiscal policy.
Eventually, that would mean major cutbacks in critical areas such as air traffic control, drug enforcement, and at the Pentagon. But most here believe that Congress will find an alternate way to cut the budget before those drastic steps become necessary. Dan?
Thanks, Bob. And still to come on tonight's CBS Evening News, Alan Pizzey on East Germany's biggest ever demonstration for democracy. And Mike Wallace interviews Nancy Reagan's astrologer.
I also affected definitely the relationship between the superpowers because of my reading of Gorbachev's horoscope.
Recently, a serious topic has come up at breakfast. Oat bran. But that doesn't mean you have to be so serious. Not with common sense oat bran waffles from Eggo. They've got all the goodness of oat bran and all the taste of a waffle.
Let's get serious.
Kellogg's common sense oat bran waffles from Eggo. Oat bran's never been so enjoyable. Seriously.
Getting out and enjoying yourself, that's what life is all about. And it's easy when you have the best bladder control protection. Depend Undergarments has special layers of absorbency that won't bunch or sag, and elastic legs for a better fit. They're the best protection and the best way for you to get back into life. Hey!
Get back into life with Depend.
Now available with and without elastic legs.
Recognize that skyline? There's only one place in the world looks like that. Manhattan. Where the air's clean, the living's easy, and the food's great. Every time I'm in Manhattan, I order my personal favorite, the New York Strip. Delicious. Manhattan's known for its famous restaurants, so be sure to try all three. Beef, real food, Manhattan, Montana.
The hurricane called Jerry was officially downgraded to a tropical depression today, but when the storm crashed into Galveston from the Gulf of Mexico last night, it was a full-fledged hurricane, packing winds up to 90 miles an hour and claiming at least 2 lives. Today, weathermen said the hurricane's winds were insignificant as it crossed northeast Texas and Louisiana, heading as a broken-up storm for Arkansas and Mississippi. But as correspondent Bob McNamara reports, the hurricane took its toll.
In the dawn after last night's bout with Jerry, Galveston felt lucky.
I think that we feel this morning battered and probably only bruised.
Lucky too, Teresa Eitz. She and her family escaping their mobile home just before it was devastated by a tornado the hurricane spawned.
The trailer was shaking, it started rocking. And then my husband opened the front door and saw stuff just flying.
Today, the Eitz record collection had a message about house trailers.
That's not amusing.
Ain't got no home.
I'm not.
Top one.
You don't see me laughing.
Yeah, I've already had one burn out from underneath me.
Yeah.
Put her in the hospital, and I just got blowed out. Maybe I don't belong in a trailer.
More than $8 million damage is what Galveston officials estimate Jerry's direct hit did to the city. But it also took 2 lives. A 24-year-old man and his 2-year-old daughter drowned when their truck plunged over a seawall while sightseeing during the storm. Though Hurricane Jerry was far from the disaster Hugo was, it had a ferocity to it nonetheless. For several hours last night, the storm battered Galveston and the East Texas coast. Winds clocked to 90 miles an hour, pulled down signs, roofs, and power lines, shattered hospital windows in Baytown, and exploded motel rooms in Galveston.
I was scared to death. I've never been so scared in my life. I knew I had to get out.
But it was yesterday, during the worst of the storm, that this angered Galveston officials most. A thrill seeker wading in the hurricane's face, and drivers going blindly along the seawall at perhaps the cost of 2 young lives. Bob McNamara, CBS News, Galveston.
In Florida, an 80% chance of favorable weather is forecast for the rescheduled launch tomorrow of Space Shuttle Atlantis. Environmental groups today lost their latest court appeal to stop the launch. A few were arrested during a symbolic protest at the Kennedy Space Center. They say that there's a safety hazard because of the nuclear fuel aboard the shuttle's main payload, the little Galileo spacecraft, which eventually will be sent to explore Jupiter.
I got just 2 things to say about this cereal. Boring. It's too simple. These days you gotta add oats or straw or hay or something. This is nothing but flakes. All right, the taste is good. I'm kind of shocked that something as simple tastes this good. You know, I think your simplicity angle will work after all. This cereal might just make it.
Kellogg's Corn Flakes.
Cornflakes? Hey, can I pick a winner or what?
Taste them again for the first time.
A Nick Spring arrangement to go to Mrs. Dorothy Lawrence in New York.
Hello, Mrs. Lawrence. Sending flowers means sending information long distance. However, during busy periods like Mother's Day, connections aren't always made in time. So this year, FTD switched to U.S. Sprint and successfully processed over 2 million orders. Of course, some results simply can't be measured. 100% digital fiber optic data, only from U.S. Sprint.
Subaru apologizes to the residents of Casa Grande, Arizona, for driving the new Subaru Legacy 60,000 miles in 19 days for a new world record. If you're listening, Casa Grande, thank you.
If your doctor has recommended fiber laxatives and you like the results, but you don't like those glasses of thick liquid, now there's FiberCon, concentrated fiber action in easy-to-swallow tablets. Ask your doctor about FiberCon.
East Germany's movement for democracy is still gaining strength. Tonight, more than 100,000 people poured into the streets of Leipzig, the biggest demonstration in East Germany's 40-year history. Police stayed away, and for the first time, the country's state-run press reported the protest march, describing it as peaceful. For tonight's report on the changing face of communism, we go to correspondent Alan Pizzi on the scene in the East German city of Leipzig.
Chanting, "We are not criminals and we want democracy," tens of thousands of East Germans took to the streets of this industrial city tonight in defiance of government wishes. They called for freedom to travel, free elections, and democracy without force. It was the second time in a week that mass demonstrations had been held here. The protesters drew inspiration from Soviet perestroika. They repeatedly chanted, "Gorby, Gorby." The excuse for the gathering was a series of church meetings to pray for political detainees, including some held for just this kind of protest. The churches did their best to avoid confrontation. Doors were closed as soon as the churches filled, hours before the prayer services were to begin. To those locked out, there was a plea from the city council: no demonstrations in the streets, please. The unofficial opposition seems to be gaining both strength and momentum.
Our demands, which we had since 6-7 years, are now the demands of the whole society.
Victory for the opposition groups comes in emotional moments. In this case, the announcement that most of the demonstrators arrested last week were to be released. Many feared it will take more than a few victories to keep East Germany from either blowing up or dying slowly from the exodus of skilled workers to the west. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, Leipzig, East Germany.
In Los Angeles today, actor Cornel Wilde died of leukemia at the age of 74. Wilde was nominated for an Academy Award for A Song to Remember in 1945. He made more than 50 movies from 1940 to 1987.
You ever run up against a tough sinus cold? The congestion and pressure's pounding. The pain is awful, but as tough as it gets, maximum strength Dristan is tougher. Dristan unblocks congestion here, knocks out pressure here and here, shuts down sinus pain, and it won't make you drowsy, and that's important when you're doing a bear of a job. When you can't call in sick, call on Dristan. It's maximum strength relief.
This is Bob. Bob could stand to lose a few. Bob, meet Pam. Cooking in Pam can save you up to 35,000 calories a year.
Give up hot chocolate just because I started wearing dentures?
Heat-resistant Fix-A-Dent spreads evenly to keep on fixing loose spots, no matter how often it gets hot.
Scam!
Fix-A-Dent, and forget it.
It's happening now. The Crab Lovers Festival at Red Lobster. King crab from icy Arctic waters, steaming, succulent. Delicate snow crab to dip, drip, and savor. And now get your taste of our sweet, meaty Pacific Dungeness. We've created 8 crab and seafood combinations starting at just $6.95. They're here now and only at Red Lobster. Friday through Sunday, try our crab and shrimp special, just $10.95.
E. Robert Wallach was a close friend and close associate of former U.S. Attorney General Ed Meese. He was sentenced in New York today to 6 years in prison and fined $250,000 in the WedTech defense contracting influence peddling deal. Well, it's back to the future for former First Lady Nancy Reagan. Mrs. Reagan, among other things, talking about her use of California astrologer Joan Quigley during the Reagan presidency, all as part of the advanced publicity for a new book. CBS News correspondent Bill Plant, who covered the Reagan presidency for us, has more now about the view from the Reagan White House as seen by Nancy Reagan.
Former First Lady Nancy Reagan says that if she could take back one decision of her husband's 8-year presidency, it would be the one which made Donald Reagan the chief of staff at the beginning of the second term. In an interview with 60 Minutes' Mike Wallace, Mrs. Reagan denied leading a dump Reagan drive, but made it clear that she had little use for him.
He ran everything with a very iron fist, and nobody could get in to see my husband. He blew up at everybody. The cabinet asked him to resign.
Even Vice President George Bush took his concerns about Don Regan to the First Lady rather than to the President.
He said that he thought that he should go. And I said, George, won't you please tell my husband that? Everybody's calling me instead of going to my husband. And he said, well, no, that's not my role. And I thought it was.
The First Lady stayed on Don Regan's case, inviting Washington insider Robert Strauss to the White House after the Iran-Contra arms sales became public. In excerpts from her book, published today, she writes that Strauss told her husband, "You're in a hell of a mess, Mr. President, and you need a chief of staff who can help you get out of it."
Highly partisan Democrat that I am, I nevertheless was flattered that they wanted my advice. I gave the very best I had, and it was exactly as reported by Mrs. Reagan.
And Don Regan was only one target. Of Ed Meese, Mrs. Reagan says she also wished he had resigned much sooner than he did. Of James A. Baker, ambitious, she says, and leaked constantly. And a particularly low opinion of former Secretary of State Alexander Haig.
He was very prickly. He was very, I thought, consumed with things that really didn't make any difference.
Nancy Reagan denies that she was the power behind the throne, but says she told Ronald Reagan what she thought. For 8 years, she writes, I was sleeping with the president. And if that doesn't give you special access, I don't know what does. Turns out the advice that the First Lady gave the president was often based on the readings of astrologer Joan Quigley. And it's advice that Mrs. Reagan admits wasn't cheap. She won't say how much, but CBS News has been told that Mrs. Reagan paid the astrologer $3,000 a month. Bill Plant, CBS News, Washington.
Now stay here with us, because in a moment we'll have more about horoscopes in high places, an interview Mike Wallace conducted with Joan Quigley, the astrologer who worked for Nancy Reagan.
A1, it's how steak is done.
Thousands of years ago, the world was introduced to a vehicle that could travel in some of the worst weather and hold plenty of cargo. This year, history repeats itself. The new four-wheel drive Subaru Legacy Wagon. After thousands of years, man still can't improve the weather, only the way he travels through it.
Good morning.
Good news. Today's X-Lax is the sure way back to natural regularity. And that's a good morning for you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Medical experts agree. Today's X-Lax helps restore your system's natural fluid balance. With balance restored, you can return to your natural regularity.
Good morning.
People just can't remember feeling this good.
Good morning.
What's the news about today's X-Lax? It's the sure way back to natural regularity.
In her interview with Mike Wallace for 60 Minutes last night, Nancy Reagan said, as she said before, that she turned to California astrologer Joan Quigley after her husband was shot and wounded by John Hinckley, that she heard Quigley had forecasted. But Mrs. Reagan flatly denied Quigley had any influence on U.S. policy, but she acknowledged that she did have influence on the timing of presidential events. But Quigley sees herself as much more of a mover and shaker in the Reagan presidency. Mike Wallace questioned closely Joan Quigley about what it was she did for Nancy Reagan.
She would call you and say, what's a good date for a news conference?
Oh, yes, every news conference, every speech, except there were a few exceptions when it was an emergency and it had to be done right then. But I did almost all the speeches, and then when Air Force One would take off with the president, I always did that.
What do you mean?
Well, the takeoffs and landings. You see, it would ensure not just the safety, but the success of the trip. I mean, there were many times that I did that. And it's fabulous being able to work with Air Force One, because you can say, you know, do this at 3 minutes after 6 and they'll do it.
You would call Mrs. Reagan.
No, she would call me. She would ask me, for instance, what are the best times for the president to do this or that, and I would say this time would be dangerous, or the outcome would be bad at a certain time, and I would just really pick the times that they did things of great importance. Sometimes I didn't, but most of the time I did.
And how often would this go on?
Well, it varied as necessity dictated, but toward the end, around 87 in the fall, when the Washington summit was so important and all of us were working so hard for it, then Nancy would call me, 2 or 3 times a day sometimes. And
ask you what?
Well, there was so much scheduling to be done for various things, and then it's very important when something like the INF Treaty would be signed to do it at a very good time. And I was working terribly hard at that time. I did work.
Are you serious, Miss Quigley?
What do you mean, am I serious?
I mean, the wife of the President of the United States would call Joan Quigley and would talk to her for a couple of hours on the telephone.
Yes.
And would talk about what time a treaty should be signed, the INF Treaty, for instance, or what time Air Force One should take off.
Yes, but I'm a very good technical astrologer, and I know how to schedule time. I also affected definitely the relationship between the superpowers because of my reading of Gorbachev's horoscope. The minute I read it, I knew that I had to change the evil empire attitude before they had their first summit, and I went about that. I talked to Nancy for 2 or 3 hours, convincing her that Gorbachev was the kind of man that was not only tough but intelligent, open to new ideas, and that he had vision like Ronald Reagan did, and that these two men had a fantastic chemistry between them. And I went into that at very great length, and I also chose the time when Air Force One would depart from Geneva.
Do you still do any astrological work for Mrs. Reagan?
No, I haven't heard from Nancy since the news broke, and she didn't want me to meet the media, and I told her I wouldn't harm her in any way, but I just had to appear because I wanted to represent reputable astrologers properly.
And so you've had no contact with
Astrologer Joan Quigley in an interview with Mike Wallace. And that's part of This and Other Worlds tonight. Dan Rather for the CBS Evening News. See you tomorrow. Good night.
This is CBS.